Hello. Today, I guess I'm here to talk to you about my chronic kidney disease story. And sometimes I'm like, where do I start? There's a million wormholes and places we can go here. But I think it's first to say that you're catching me at a really interesting moment in my life. And I'd even call it a beginning in some ways. And um, this is also the start of me publicly sharing my health story beyond friends and family. It's also the start of a new chapter where I'm focusing much more on my health and wellness and my body and taking care of it and exploring different ways that I can help it to function better, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm also deeply feeling the call to help others who also may be on this same path. So if you are here for that reason, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so glad you found me and hoping that we get to connect in all the ways. So, on the Sick and Seeking YouTube page, I'm sharing my personal health story. And that's where I'm going to talk about kidney disease and Hashimoto's and, finding a new nephrologist, finding a naturopath, and all that good stuff. And I also have the Sick and Seeking podcast. So the podcast is an interview style podcast. Maybe you've already listened to it already. And this is where I speak with people who are also living with disease or managing an illness or something that's going, on in their body that they've had to really, go down that sort of medical journey that I've been on for a really long time myself. But I also interview people who are offering their expertise, their set of beliefs, techniques, or sort of tools that they think can help unlock or assist people with, bringing back that vitality, wholeness, and wellness to their bodies. So that's a little bit about my podcast, a little bit about what I'm doing here on my YouTube page as well. So essentially, I like to think that both places, the YouTube page and also my podcast, is really a love note to my body, especially my kidneys. And I know that creating both and showing up for both is a part of my healing story. And I invite you to listen to the Sick and Seeking podcast. Maybe you'll find my personal story interesting. Maybe there's something you can relate to. Maybe you're doing things or have things going on with your kidneys, or maybe you know someone who also is, managing maybe a chronic kidney disease diagnosis. And basically, I hope that I can be a part of your healing story as well. So this is an interesting moment. It is a beginning. And sometimes I like to say that it's taken me 20 years to get here. Also, I sometimes say it's taken my whole life. It's taken 38 years to get here. So I was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease 20 years ago. And my story is my story. Everyone who has chronic kidney disease has their own unique version of what happened, how they got there, how they found it, how they're managing it. And so I'm really just here to kind of share my story, just to give you a little backstory on myself. And maybe it could be helpful. I often say that my kidneys take the bulk of my mental energy around, and my physical energy too. They don't take, but like, you know what I mean, around sort of like my daily life and my health story. So, before I even get into my chronic kidney disease story, which I think is kind of an interesting one, maybe I'm biased because it's my own story, but it's just that it doesn't follow the typical sort of progression, or even the diagnosis, or even like where I'm at is a little bizarre. But I think it's first important that I talk about chronic kidney disease. So I'm going to do a little bit of like the here's what it's about sort of stuff. Obviously, you have Google, but maybe it's easier to listen to someone else talk about it. And so I pulled off some stats and figures from kidney. Kidney is very hard for me to say, so please forgive me. I pulled off some stats and figures from kidney.org. Obviously, once you Google search, you're going to find a lot of information about chronic kidney disease. But I sort of wanted to give this sort of like what it is, all like the brief stuff, so that maybe it can give you a little bit more context about my story. So chronic kidney disease, which I'm going to stop saying kidneys if I don't have to, it's also known as chronic renal disease. I also call it CKD. Many people call it CKD as well. And it's a condition characterized by the gradual loss of kidney function over time. So these are the top 5 jobs of the kidneys. Now, I should also know you have 2. Not everyone has 2. So let's like not, everybody is very unique. Some people have one giant one. Some people were born with only one. Some people have three kidneys. Like, there's all these crazy things that are actually happening in your body that a lot of people don't even know until you start looking around and going like, oh, I didn't know. My sister had two spleens. Like, these things happen. Genetics are weird. So you have two kidneys. I'm going to get the placement wrong. Basically, they're sort of like, I think about where they are in my body. They're sort of like the lower end of my rib cage down on the back side. And so I, for one, have two. So these are the top jobs of the kidneys, as again listed on kidney.org. So pulled all this from there. Is that number one, they remove waste and extra fluid. They control your blood pressure. They make red blood cells. They keep the bones healthy, and they control the pH levels. So that's what they do. Now, I'm going to share some stats, not to freak you out. It's just for some informative purposes. So number one, 37 million Americans have CKD, and millions of others are at risk. So what is that? That's 15% of adults in the US. And then of those 50%, 90% of them don't even realize they have it, and it doesn't come about until, I don't know, it's kind of caught usually. There's something that kind of shows up in a blood test. There's something they're feeling. There's different reasons how you usually find out that you have chronic kidney disease. So not to freak you out, but just like, hey, awareness, go to your doctor. If you feel weird, run a blood test. So early detection can help prevent the progression of kidney disease into kidney failure. And again, you can just do a blood or urine test. It's not hard. It's just a specific panel that you need to run. And for instance, the panel, I don't know the exact name of the panel. I don't know. But basically, most doctors or kidney doctors, which are called nephrologists, so I might say the word nephrologists, those are the people who work with the kidneys, they'll test for something called the creatinine, the level of creatinine. And not going to go into the science there, but that's usually what they're looking for in testing. So, heart disease is the primary cause of death for all people who live with CKD. So that's lovely. Diabetes and high blood pressure, or high blood pressure is also called hypertension, in case you didn't know that. They're responsible for 2/3 of chronic kidney disease cases. So that's like the bulk of it. Diabetes and high blood pressure are kind of the bulk of how CKD comes about. So what are the symptoms? Now, it's interesting when I read these symptoms, I'm like, yeah, I got like all those. So these are some symptoms. Again, your body is unique to you. It's really important that you're doing your work to pay attention to it, because we're so good at sort of disassociating and pulling away from it. Or maybe that's just me. I don't know. These are some of the symptoms you could feel if you had chronic kidney disease, or the start of, not kidney failure, but like the start of your kidneys losing function and like something going on there. So you could notice that you feel more tired and have less energy. That's like my daily life. Have trouble concentrating. I mean, don't we all? We all drink too much like caffeine. Isn't that? Anyway, have a poor appetite, have trouble sleeping. Now, I do not have a poor appetite. I'm talking about myself a lot, but anyway. Other things, you could have muscle cramping at night, swollen feet and ankles, puffiness around your eyes, especially in the morning, dry, itchy skin, need to urinate more often, especially at night. I actually do have a lot / most of those, so there we go. So chronic kidney disease includes conditions that damage your kidneys, and that then decreases their ability to keep you healthy and basically filter out the waste from your blood, as well as all the other things that the kidneys do. So if kidney disease worsens, waste can build up into your blood and they make you feel sick. It's very dangerous. You can develop different complications like high blood pressure, anemia, weak bones, poor nutritional health, nerve damage, all that stuff. So kidney disease also increases your risk of having heart and blood vessel diseases. So these problems usually happen slowly over time. That's why early detection and treatment is really important, so that you can stop things from getting worse. And when the kidney disease progresses, it can eventually lead to kidney failure. So when you're in kidney failure, that's when you require dialysis or kidney transplantation in order to live. So I'm going to say that again. When you move all the way down in the function, in order to live, you need dialysis or you need a transplant. Let's remind everybody that when I say 38 million Americans have chronic kidney disease, doesn't mean they're in end stage or failure, but it means that they could move there one day. And these are some of the reasons or ways that you would have an increased risk for kidney disease. So, again, if you are diabetic, if you had high blood pressure, if you have a history of kidney failure in your family, if you're older, or if you belong to a population with a high rate of diabetes or high blood pressure, so those are such as population groups like African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian, Pacific Islanders, and American Indians. So, a lot of groups are maybe a little bit more predisposed to having CKD. So, it's also important to note that everyone loses kidney function as they age. So in theory, we're all born with 100% function. And as we age, life happens. You lose kidney function. This is completely normal. So that's why it's more common for older adults to develop CKD. So you're also given even a level of like what your function is depending on how much kidney loss you've had. I should mention, and I don't know all the science, I don't know all the particular circumstances, but I know people who also have had like decreasing kidney function, but it was temporary, so they were able to get it back up. So CKD is really like long-term loss, like really losing without much gain back in function. So you're even given a different stage depending on how much function you've lost. So they use something called the GFR rate, which is the I'm reading it out. Someone's going to have to say that for me. Glomerular filtration rate. I hope that's right. So stage 1 is like you have 90% more function, like you're filtering everything, like you got 90% ability or more to filter. And then you move down from there. So when you get into stage 4, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So stage 4 is like really severe. That's when you only have about 15, I'm reading it here, 15 to 29%, I say function, like ability to filter rate. So that's a 15 to like 30. That's stage 4. You're pretty far down. And stage 5 is the end stage. That's like they're pretty much in full failure. You need to have some major medical intervention, dialysis for sure, and or a transplant. And people can live on dialysis for years. I think I read once someone's lived on dialysis for decades. Now, quality of life is not great though when you're living on dialysis that long, but it's possible. And some people will never be, eligible for a transplant, which is not just because of age. There's a lot of other factors about why you will not be accepted for a kidney transplant program. I don't even know all of them, but I know it's really horrible and sad, and it's a whole nother topic. But again, you can find all this information through a Google search or through kidney.org. Now, I guess I want to get into my story here. So if you're still following along, or maybe just push forward to my part of the story, is I was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease when I was 18 years old. It was my first semester of college at USC here in Southern California. What do I want to say next? All right. So yes, it was my first. So I want to talk about my chronic kidney disease story. So it started when I was 18 years old. I was in my first semester of college at USC. I was in the middle of finals, and during that time I had gone and seen my OBGYN, and you go in there, they ask you all those questions that I used to find really annoying, like, have you vomited? Are you I don't know the questions they even ask. You're always like, I'm fine, no. Those questions, right? So I went through all those questions like, I'm good, I'm fine, nothing's wrong with me, like just look up my vagina and take my pap smear, basically. But what was interesting is they took my blood pressure. And I remember the nurse going like, whoa, like your blood pressure is really high. Let me take that again. And I was like, go ahead. And she's like, whoa, it's really high. Like, did you know it's high? And I'm like, no, didn't know my blood pressure is high. Like, that's weird. And she's like, yeah, you really need to test this in a week again. Like, it's extremely high. We're talking like 180 over like 150, 160, like really, really high numbers. So the average for blood pressure, oh my God, I'm being put on the spot right now, is 135. No. I'm not even going to tell you what the average blood pressure is because I was not prepared for this moment. Google it. And I do take my blood pressure all the time. I should know this. Oh my God, don't quote me here. Anyway, it was very high. So a week later, I'm now in the middle of my first set of finals at USC. I'm, 18 years old. I'm stressed out. And I get a call from that doctor's office saying, "Hey, Leslie, we need you to go take your blood pressure again." And I was like, I have a final tomorrow. I am 18. I am in the middle of finals. And I remember like grumpy girl, like, stop, 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 going over to the health center at USC. And I was like, my doctor called and said, "You need to be here." Like 18 and grumpy. And so the woman took my blood pressure. She's like, "Yeah, your blood pressure is really high." And I was like, duh, like blood pressure. I know I totally was probably like that. I was like, blood pressure is connected to like when you're stressed. Like, I'm stressed right now. I'm right in the middle of my finals. Of course my blood pressure is going to be through the roof. And that was a really pivotal moment because the woman said, "I really don't want you to leave until I take some blood." And I, again, like, imagine me as like, "Here, take my blood, like, just get me out of here." Like, I'm like, I gotta go study and stress out. So she took my blood. I don't know how she was able to so quickly turn this around in hindsight. I guess the lab was right there and she was like, boom, we're going to get those results. I feel like 30 minutes later, she goes, "I just want to let you know I ran a panel and something's going on with your kidneys." And I was like, okay. She was like, "Your creatinine is elevated." I was like, okay. Like, I'm 18. I don't know what the hell she's talking about. And she's like, "It's elevated to the point that you need to go to the hospital right now." And I was like, oh, yeah, that was a big deal. Like, she was very insistent, and to the point where she was like, "You're basically not leaving here unless I know you're going to go to the hospital. And if I need to, I'll call an ambulance." Like, that's like, I was like, what is happening right now? So I remember I called my dad. He worked in downtown. It's very close to USC. And he came and picked me up and was like, "I don't know, Dad. I got some crazy tests about my creatinine. We need to go to the hospital right now." I'm like bewildered. I'm like, I have a test tomorrow. I have a final tomorrow. So I remember we went to our local hospital here in Arcadia, California. We go into the emergency room. I'm kind of like, what is happening to me? What are these people talking about? Scared and nervous, obviously. And I remember us showing up and the doctors like taking one look at me, asking me a few questions. And they were like, "Oh, she's fine. Like, we're just going to give her a few, I think like blood pressure meds. She'll be fine. There's nothing wrong with her." And I remember that I believe me or my dad or someone was very insistent. I feel like it was me. I was like, there's more to the story here. I really need you to look at this blood test. And I remember the ER doctor being pretty dismissive. He was like, "You're fine." And I do remember this. He goes, "Those health center, on campus health centers don't really know what they're talking about." And he like totally dismissed them. I was like, okay. But I'm like, "But here's my blood work." And I like handed it over. Because again, if they hadn't taken blood work at all, I was in the ER, they were just taking my blood pressure. And he looks at the numbers. He goes, "Oh, yeah, okay. We probably should take you back for further evaluation." So that was the moment of me realizing how to advocate for myself and to be really upfront with like, "Hey, wait a second here. Something, I never did thank that woman at that health sciences campus little on USC. I don't even know what you call it, but I'm still really indebted to her and I'm really thankful. And I always meant to call her and say thank you because she was a pivotal person in like finding out what was going on with me and also calling the woman at my OBGYN who followed up really diligently. Like, those two women were really important people in helping me get to know that there's something going on with my kidneys. I mean, how long had that been going on? We don't know. But I was at a pivotal moment where we really needed to take some, action to like really like slow the progression and like see what was going on. So that's my thank you to them and sending them all the good love and all the good vibes because I might not be where I am today without them. And all the other people who've helped me along the way, but they get a special shout out. So that was a really scary time too, because I'm 18 years old. I'm being put in the hospital. I'm technically an adult, by the way. And I remember them speaking to my parents, out in the hallway without me. And I recently watched the show on TV. It's the show, and I'm going to forget the name, where there's these kids who are in this hospice. It's a new show that just came on. And there's a scene where this girl is, she's basically terminally ill, whatever. And then her parents are out being like told she's terminally ill and she's like in the room listening. Whew, talk about like very traumatic moment for me watching this show like 2 weeks ago, and like, yeah, that happened to me. Obviously, I'm not in hospice. I'm not end stage of life. However, I totally get that moment. I just wanted to sidebar that because it was really weird and it was a really scary time. Like no one knew what was happening. I was with people who didn't really, they weren't really specialists. They were like doctors at the Arcadia Methodist Hospital doing the best they can, but they weren't really like the top people who really kind of understood. And then I was bounced over to USC Medical and I found a fantastic doctor there. And I'm really also very grateful for his care and his attention because I know a lot of those early days and those early weeks, it's like it's such a pivotal moment. Who are you speaking with? What's the information you're getting? What's the care that you're getting? He was able to really slow things down and like calm me. And I'm also very thankful to him. His name is Dr. Vito Campisi. He is now retired, but he was a really special doctor. Like I get even almost emotional thinking about him and his care and how, again, he's that pivotal piece of my story in the beginning that really set me, I feel like, to get to maybe where I am today. He's a piece of that. So that was a lot. I don't know if you listened to all that, but there it is. So I wrote some notes now about more, and so I'm going to start reading again that, living with CKD and eventually kidney failure, particularly kidney failure, is like a really, really big deal. And, when you get to the point where you're sub 15, you're sub 20, and you need to, did I already talk about that? No, I didn't. So I didn't talk about that yet. And I want to go back for a second. So when you have chronic kidney disease, so sub 20 is the moment, like 20% function or GFR, like the filtering rate. When you're 20 or below, that's the moment where the doctors like start going like, hey, you really got to think about, and you should be thinking about this a little bit before too. But at that moment, particularly for someone like me, it's like, hey, you really got to get into a kidney transplant program. You need to figure out if you have a live donor. So there's all this information about transplantation. I really don't want to get into it here. I was thrown down that gauntlet about 2 years ago, and it's like, whoa, it's a lot to take in. So yeah, I've already started the path of going down and I've been accepted to a kidney transplant program here at UCLA Medical. You have to jump through a lot of hoops, do a lot of testing, and, they don't accept everybody. So I was accepted. Also, when you're at that point too, if it keeps going, you might not need dialysis. So when you're at 10% function or less, like your kidneys cannot filter enough to keep you alive safely. That's the point where you need dialysis. And there's different types of dialysis. Dialysis is a lot. I've never gone through it myself. I do know someone and others, and I've seen stuff on social media of people who do it. I have an uncle who's gone through it. It's depending on what type you're doing. Like you have to get sort of like pieces implanted into your neck, into your arm, and so they can hook the machines up to you so that can filter the blood. There's other ones that are a sort of surgical procedure to add something to your abdomen so that you can do it, sort of like internally at different times of the day. And again, this is a lot. You have to think about your diet, your fluids. It's exhausting. Talk about disrupting your life. It's a whole thing. So if you want to know more about dialysis, I really think you should look it up. It's not easy. People can be in dialysis for decades. But it's not really a great quality of life when you are. Some people will never be accepted to a kidney transplant program for many reasons. Some people are too old to be transplanted. It's like, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's like I don't even, I guess, want to get into all that. And I think there's other people who are actually living it or who have lived it and actually can speak more to it. I'm just familiar with it. One thing that I've done is I've joined a sort of a kidney support group. A lot of people have feelings about like Facebook groups, like, Facebook. The thing about certain Facebook groups are they can be actually super beneficial if you find the right one, and it really has something in there that can help you with whatever you're going through. Or maybe you love to, it's a singing group, or maybe you love to knit. Well, I found one on living with kidney disease, with transplants, and it's actually shared a lot of information. I learn a lot from the people who post in there about what they're going through, different options for them, different medications, different tips and tricks about how they live with, the fact that they are on dialysis or they're doing the transplant. I mean, there's a whole community of people out there for you. And I do recommend that you find those communities, even if they're on your Facebook feed and you kind of like see stuff. It's a lot at first, because that's how I've learned a lot of things. Obviously, you have to check with your doctor and make sure it's actual legit, but you start seeing the same things over and over again. These are people really sharing what they're going through. And yeah, it's actually helped me. It's helped me have like bite-sized pieces to get me more ready for like if I need dialysis or if I need a transplant. So yeah, it's a lot. So what's interesting about my chronic kidney disease is that I was never biopsied. So, oh my God, how many times have I been asked if I've been biopsied? No, I have not been biopsied. I should just send this video to all the doctors in the future. Never been biopsied to figure out what disease actually affected my kidneys. My kidney disease is connected to hypertension or blood pressure, as you heard from my story. So they don't really know what causes what. Is it the chicken or the egg? Does the hypertension cause the kidney disease? Does the kidney disease cause the It just kind of circulates. Now, there's probably some sort of genetic factors at play. I know that there's been some sort of movement towards understanding what genes. Obviously, there's so much more they don't know, but it's not really, that hard to see that a lot of people in my family have kidney things. They don't have what I have, but they have other sort of issues like tons of uncles, cousins, whatever. So there's something probably in our genetic makeup that is causing us to be predisposed to kidney problems. So what's also interesting about me and my story is that when I was diagnosed when I was 18, I remember that doctor I said I really enjoyed, and who really sort of like set me on a really good like beginning path of managing this condition. I remember him telling me, and again, he was very vague, and I loved that. He never wanted to move forward so quickly. He never wanted to talk about dialysis. He didn't want to talk about transplant. He's like, we're just going to take this one day and one step at a time. And he would always say, we'll cross that bridge when we need to. And I never knew until now how impactful that was, because he didn't even want me to go there. He's like, we'll get there when we need to. That was really powerful for me. So I really appreciate that. One thing that he did tell me, but I asked and he had to give his guess, was I said, how long will my kidneys last? And he said, I'd guess maybe 10 years, maybe 15, maybe less, maybe more. So when you're 18, you do the calculations. And you're like, oh my God, that's right when I want to be like getting married and having a family. And what's interesting is he gave me, I remember that 10 to 15 year mark, and I'm now at 20 years. So I am 20 years living still with my disease, still kind of generally pretty much stable. However, in the past couple of years, started to poke its little head up, be like, boop, kidneys want to be heard. They want to talk. They're speaking a little bit more. And so in the past couple of years, right when the pandemic was hitting, that sort of precipitated me going and finding a kidney transplant program and going through that process. So I remember I was going through that process during the pandemic. So it was really, really tough. It was actually a really tough time when I was going through the kidney transplant program process. So where am I on my kidney function? This is a very interesting story. So remember when I said that 20% function and below is when you start getting ready, kidney transplant program, thinking about living donors, or do you have a donor and all that good stuff. And then 10% below is like, you need dialysis. So where do I want to go with this? Don't think I'm going to talk about the transplant stuff yet, because it's very unique to me and where I live and the program that I was accepted to. But what's really interesting is that depending on the type of test that you use to test kidney function, now the most one is to look at your creatinine. So that's the one we've been using for 20 years. And because things started to shift in the past couple of years, we've been like really, really watching these numbers. And what happened is my creatinine was very stable for many, many years. I had it as low as 1.8 at one point. Then it kind of trickled up to 2, and then it sat at 2.5 for a really, really long time. And 2.5 is like, it's hard for me to tell you like what the filtration is, but I track sometimes filtration, sometimes I track the creatinine. So the creatinine is sort of the number that I've used the longest. So again, elevated creatinine is a sign of kidney failure, kidney function issues, going potentially into kidney failure, chronic kidney disease. There we go. So again, 1.8 at one point in my life, it went down, it went up to 2.5, and I really sat at 2.5 for a really long time. So that's great. It's stable. Nothing's changing. Check in with a doctor. How you doing, doc? Still at 2.5? Great. Run away. It's basically how I would treat it. So in the past couple of years, when the pandemic hit, 2.5 started to creep up to 2.8, started to creep up to 3, started to get some 3.2s. I've had 3.5. I've had as high as 3.8. So lots of movement, lots of changes for, 18 years, nothing really changed, very minimal. I've even had it go down a bit, which was amazing. But then it's, past 2 years really, really starting to creep up. So that's really scary for obvious reasons, as I've said. And so we started to do some more testing. And this is what's really been interesting about just first my typical progression of like someone in my circumstances. This is not normal. So usually you have chronic kidney disease and things sort of just keep moving. So I told you I was very stable for 18 years, very little movement. Most people, that is not the case. It can change rapidly. It can change over weeks, months, a few years. But like I said, most doctors, they gave me like, oh, we can give you 10 years. We don't really know. Everyone is so unique. So I also found it really interesting. I've seen different nephrologists over the years. And one, I had like a 7-year gap. I'd seen him once and then I moved back to New York City and I started seeing him again. And I remember him being like really like awestruck. He was like, whoa, he's like, your numbers are like the same, like 7 years ago and to now. So, he was saying like, this is not normally how it works. He's like, it usually just kind of gets worse at different pace for everybody. But he's like, if there were 100 people who I'd seen 7 years ago, and then I saw them 7 years later, and there was 100 of you, he's like, you'd be the only one who would be in this sort of circumstance where you were so stable. And I was like, whoa, like it's awesome being the atypical and exceptional patient, but like, it makes you ask a lot of questions of why. And most recently, since I've been having that big change and the big swings of like going up and up and up pretty fast, we've been doing more testing. And I think it's really fascinating too, because there's different tests you can run, like I was saying, the creatinine test, and there's also one called the cystatin C test. And the creatinine test has shown that I'm at a filtration rate. Some have shown as low as 16%. Some have shown like 25%. So there's like a big gap. So then we take the cystatin C test, which is supposed to be, I don't know, like the even more, appropriate, like, what's the word? Pointed, correct test for kidneys. And I was like, it's been 18 years. Like no one's done a cystatin C test on me. Like what is happening? So we did that a couple years ago. And that test's come back and it says, oh, your filtration rate is like 29 or 30. You're good. What do I do with that? I have some tests which are like, you're at 16%. And then I have other tests that are like, you're at 30. Ooh. So this has been really interesting. And this is my most recent stuff with my kidneys. And I remember my most recent nephrologist going, yeah, that's really weird. Never seen that before. I think we'll just take the average. I was like, okay, so we're just guessing here. So on average, I am somewhere around 22-ish, 23-ish% function. So that's where I am. That's apparently no one really knows, which this is a lot. It's really a lot to just think about every day and carry with me literally every day. And I guess knowing that I'm this atypical, exceptional case, I haven't followed the same progression. I've known this for like the whole time. I know that there's something bigger at play with my condition, that there's something that I can't quite explain. And I've always sensed that there's like, why me? Why am I different? Why didn't, doesn't it follow like pretty much everyone else who's in my same circumstance? And um, what I like to think is that there's sort of higher or unseen forces at play. And this has always piqued my curiosity. I've always been open to the unexplained, and you can call it the woo or the spiritual side. But I like to think that the past couple years, as things started to change, it was like my body's way of saying, like, wake up, you got to focus on this now. Like, we're not joking around anymore. You know, you had fun, like checking with your doctor and running away and pretending like everything's fine. Lucky you. But now it's like, hey, there is more here. You got to listen to us. So, me speaking here, this very long-winded chat about me and my story, is me speaking about my kidneys. It's me having the time to really connect with them, to not ignore them anymore, to really do some work to learn more about them, more about things I can do to heal them, more things about just like, you know, what's going on and what I can do. And when I first wrote this and I started talking about my story, I remember having like a huge reaction in my body. And that's the interesting thing and kind of the hard thing about having a medical condition. It really, like, it could hit you in the gut with like all the stuff that's going on for you, and it hits all the levels: the mental, the physical, the emotional, the spiritual. It really kind of stops you, and it's a really heavy burden. Like, these kidneys come with me every day, everywhere. They're always with me. And not just the kidneys. I haven't even talked to you about all the other health things that I have going on. Today, I just wanted to talk about the kidneys because I feel like they're front and center. They want to be seen. They want to be talked about. They want to be, you know, they want to be in the mix right now. So yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot, like carrying this around with us all the time. It's very taxing. And part of also what I'm doing here, talking about my story and on the Sick and Seeking podcast, is that I've noticed that conventional medicine has sort of maybe had some big blind spots and gaps. Now, I want to recognize that like science and conventional medicine have also kept me alive. I would have been dead many times or been living a really horrible life if it wasn't for modern medicine. So I'm very thankful and very grateful for science, modern medicine, and conventional medicine. But one recent part of my story, when I've been going through this, hey, what's going on? Like, the numbers are changing. I got to get into a kidney transplant program. Like, is everything okay? Like, I need to start thinking about all those things. Was I'm with a new doctor, and I've been really frustrated with his care. I might even share some videos about after I got out of the doctor's office with him and why I was so frustrated. And then I was reminded by people that I know a lot, and there's probably a reason why I am frustrated. And why he made me frustrated is because I was noticing, he was just like, all right, well, here are your test results. There they are. You're stable to this point now. We know you're hovering around here. We'll just, you know, you've moved, but you're here now. So we'll just keep checking you. And I was like, okay. And in the past, that's what I did. Okay, we'll just keep checking me. Bye. Leave you. Don't want to think about this. And there was something about working with him recently that I was like really frustrated, obviously. I was like, well, so we just sit and we just like hang out a little bit. So all my other nephrologists felt a little bit more proactive. Like they always like had something else they wanted me to try, or we're going to tweak this, or they always had sort of something that showed me that they were being a little bit more proactive. Like, I felt like I was getting really good care from them, even if they weren't really doing much. That sounds mean, but you know what I mean. This guy in particular was like not proactive. He was like, yeah, so how you doing? You're good? Like, I would have to go, hey, my blood pressure is changing. Hey, like all the things I knew that I should be thinking about and monitoring, I was like bringing up into my doctor's visits. And he was just like, oh, okay, yeah, well, we could look into that, or, oh, okay. Like, very like nonchalant, just kind of like waiting it out. And I was the proactive one. So as frustrated as I have been with him, and I am getting a new nephrologist, working on that, I'm actually very thankful for him, because he is the one who showed me that I'm not just going to sit and wait anymore for my kidneys to just like, you know, potentially get worse. So isn't it interesting that there can be silver linings in our health journeys and our health stories? So this is the guy who really had me wake up a little bit and say like, whoa, like I'm at a point where like things are really potentially changing and I need to be more proactive. So just sitting here and just waiting and managing symptoms and do is pretty much just going to take the status quo. Like nothing's going to change. So this is the moment in my life where I've decided to say, hey, I'm going to be more proactive. I'm going to go down that curiosity route and start learning what I can and being open-minded and just learning more about healing, more about kidneys, more about the body, more about all the things that can affect the body. So I'm kind of thankful for that guy, even though he's really annoying too. Yeah. So it's kind of where I'm at. I also had a really cool discovery. So this doctor, this conventional medicine doctor, again, they give me all the meds. I need the meds. This is great. But I'm really more curious about like what else is there. Because with these guys, I'm just hanging around. They're monitoring me. They're giving me pills. Great. We're stabilizing things and symptoms. But I'm not really doing anything to heal my body. And if I'm perfectly honest, I feel really silly that it took me, 20 years to think about that. To think like, hey, we might need to do things to improve this situation instead of just waiting around for it to potentially go in the direction we don't want it to go into. So I'm a little embarrassed to say it took me this long to come here, but I'm here, and that's what matters. So I'm inviting others to watch me on my journey, to share with me about their healing journey, and So the most recent thing I did was see not a nephrologist, saw him, was to see a naturopath. So this is one of the first steps I've taken to moving towards being a little bit more thoughtful and more proactive and not saying like, I'm just going to sit and wait here and just see what happens. And I'll share with you in some other videos how that's going. It's going to be a long process figuring out, the treatment with him and all that good stuff. But what I think is really interesting is that when I was first diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, and this is the last thing I want to share with you, is that I was 18 years old. And I remember when I finally got to that doctor who was like the one who I felt really stable and like connected with and really held and cared by. I remember him like telling me like, your kidneys are, there's disease, they are not working any longer, and they are tiny, they're scarred, all these things. And he like gave me the news, and I remember sitting there, and I was 18. I was like, okay. I was like, yeah, that's kind of bad. But in my brain, I was like, but I'm just gonna fix them. I'm just gonna regenerate them. That's what I thought. And I said it out loud. I think my parents were there, the doctor's there, and they were like, no, you can't. You can't regenerate your kidneys. Like, that's not how it works. I want to say other organs, it could be different, but for the kidneys, they were like, nope, can't happen. So I was like, okay, well, I swore I could, but whatever. So I'd say about 3 weeks ago, working with this naturopath, he wants to put me on a very specific diet for chronic kidney disease. And you could check out my video where I start to talk about that. And I wanted to do a little bit more research around potassium levels and phosphorus. So he's really trying to pull those things out of my diet for different reasons. When you have chronic kidney disease, you want to pull those things out. So he wanted to see if we could pull those things out, give me more function. So I was doing some research, and, again, it's been 20 years. I've done research at different points in my life. So here I was reading up about kidneys and all that good stuff. And I don't know why or how I got there. And I'm going to link in the show notes about this website and to this this article that I read. But what's really interesting is that about 10 years ago, so we're in 2022, it's about 10 years ago, there was, I think, some doctors in Israel and a medical institution here in the US where they came out and they said, oops, we got it wrong. The kidneys can regenerate themselves. You heard that right. They're like, for decades, we didn't think it was possible, but turns out you can. The kidneys can. And I thought that was really cool, and I think it speaks to a little bit about sort of that sometimes science isn't there yet. And again, they don't really understand all those forces of how it happens, and it's a very controlled environment. They're not saying the whole kidneys are like going to be all fixed and they know how to do that yet. I hope one day they will. They're able to study a fish that is able to do this, and hopefully they're going to keep making breakthroughs and understanding. When I was doing some research, I was noticing that stem cell therapy seemed to be helpful in supporting the kidneys to regenerate. So I thought that was really fascinating as well. But all very cutting edge, all very new science, but totally like validated my 18-year-old brain that was like, I'll just fix them. Now, was I guessing? Maybe, because I was 18 and didn't know any better. Or did I really know something? Did I innately know, like, hey, this is possible? And so I think that's what I'm also curious about, that I want to talk about here on my YouTube page and on the Sick and Seeking podcast. Because I think there's a lot out there that we can't quite understand, we can't quite explain, and I still think there's value there. Just because we can't quantify it, just because we can't measure it, just because science can't prove it, doesn't mean that it's not possible. Now, you can say that's a little too out there, it's not empirical, you can say all those things, but I think it's important to make space for that. And I think it's important that you can meet at that nexus of what we know and what we don't know. And I think in that moment, in that place, like, there's a lot of miracles and a lot of things happening that we can't quite understand, but just being open to it is important, and there's value there. So thanks for listening if you made it this far, and hope you'll check out some of my other videos here on YouTube and also my Sick and Seeking podcast. One day I'm hoping to run wellness retreats. Not sure what that's going to look like or where we're going to go and what we're going to do. But if you would like to hear more about that, you can check out my website at www.sickandseeking.com. You can share your email address with me, and I can always pop you, that sounds weird. I can always pop some updates into your email whenever I have them. So thanks for listening.